Sometimes the hardest part of walking away isn't leaving, it's staying gone. We tell ourselves we need one last goodbye, one more conversation, one more chance to explain, but that's just another way of holding on. If you truly want to heal, if you want to get your power back, it's not about the goodbye. It's about removing him for good. No goodbye, no return, only forward. When we talk about removing someone for good, the first thing that always comes up is the idea of closure. People think, if I could just have one last conversation, if he could just explain why he left, if he could just tell me he's sorry, then I could move on. But here's the truth most people don't want to face. Closure isn't something he gives you. Closure is something you create for yourself. The reason so many people stay stuck in pain after a breakup is because they keep waiting for someone who already proved they're not good for them to suddenly become the source of their healing. And that never works. Think about it. If he couldn't respect you when you were together, what makes you believe he will suddenly respect you when he's walking out? If he couldn't give you clarity while you were investing your heart, why would he suddenly give you clarity when he has nothing left to lose? The need for closure is often just another way of staying tied to someone. It's an excuse to keep the door cracked open, to still feel like maybe there's a chance, to stay connected to a story that has already ended. You don't need him to give you permission to let go. You don't need him to sign off on your healing. Closure is really about acceptance. It's about accepting that you may never get all the answers. You may never understand why he did what he did. You may never hear the apology you deserve, and yet you still get to decide that your peace of mind is more important than his explanation. You get to decide that your future is more valuable than replaying your past. That decision is what true closure looks like, not a text, not a meeting, not a final goodbye. It's the moment you say, I'm done seeking answers from someone who wasn't the answer. There's another layer to this too. The very act of searching for closure outside of yourself gives away your power. It says, my healing depends on him. But the moment you flip that script and realize, my healing depends on me, you step back into control. You stop waiting. You stop checking your phone. You stop creating scenarios in your head about what he might say. Instead, you decide to give yourself what you've been hoping he would give you: honesty, compassion, clarity. That's when you stop being the one chasing answers and start being the one building your future. People often fear that if they don't get closure, the pain will never end. But in reality, the pain lingers because they keep postponing their healing while waiting for it. The pain ends when you stop negotiating with the past. When you tell yourself, I may not have every detail figured out, but I have enough evidence to know this isn't right for me, and that's all the closure I need. That's when you can finally breathe again, not because he gave you permission, but because you reclaimed it for yourself. And the irony is, once you stop seeking closure, that's when you actually feel it. Because closure isn't about his words, it's about your choice. It's about looking in the mirror and deciding you are worth moving on for. It's about realizing that peace doesn't come from the person who hurt you. Peace comes from you choosing yourself, choosing your dignity, and choosing not to wait another day for someone who has already shown you that they don't value your heart the way it deserves to be valued. When someone is still in your life, even if only through a text thread, a social media feed, or the occasional late night call, there's still a line of connection open. And that line of connection is what keeps the emotions alive. It's like an emotional supply line. Every little interaction feeds the bond, even when you're trying to convince yourself that you've moved on. The truth is, every time you check his profile, every time you respond to a message, every time you allow yourself to go back into old conversations, you're pouring energy into a connection that needs to be starved, not fed. Healing doesn't happen in an environment where reminders are constant. Healing happens when you deliberately cut off the flow of emotional fuel that keeps you tied to someone. It's easy to underestimate the power of small interactions. You might tell yourself, it's just one text, it's just one peek at his story, it's harmless. But those tiny moments are what keep the emotional attachment alive. They spark old feelings, they bring back memories, they stir up hope. And hope, when it comes to someone who isn't good for you, is the enemy of healing. Hope keeps you checking, keeps you waiting, keeps you wondering if maybe things could change. That's why cutting the emotional supply line isn't a suggestion, it's essential. Because as long as there's a drip of connection, there will always be a part of you that struggles to move forward. That's why blocking, muting, or deleting isn't about being dramatic or bitter. It's about protecting your peace. Too many people see these actions as extreme, as if they are signs of weakness. But the reality is, it takes strength to say, I'm not going to give myself the temptation. I'm not going to leave the door cracked open. I'm choosing to make it impossible for him to take up space in my mind. When you silence the noise, your heart finally gets a chance to rest. Because it's not constantly triggered, it's not constantly reminded, it's not constantly pulled back into a story you're trying to end. This doesn't mean you'll never think about him again. Cutting the emotional supply line doesn't erase the past overnight, but it creates the space for your feelings to settle instead of constantly being reactivated. It allows you to experience life without the constant influx of reminders. Think of it like a wound. A wound can't heal if it keeps being poked at. The same is true with your heart. Every message, every glance at his page, every little interaction is like poking the wound. The only way for it to close is to leave it alone. There will be moments when the urge to check in feels overwhelming. That's normal. What matters is recognizing that every time you resist, you reclaim a little more of your power. Every time you choose not to feed the connection, you weaken it. And over time, that weakness becomes freedom. The craving lessens, the attachment fades, and the emotions that once felt overwhelming lose their hold on you. That process begins the moment you decide that your peace is worth more than the temporary high of connection. The truth is, people stay stuck because they confuse connection with comfort. That small hit of comfort you get from seeing his name pop up, from scrolling through his updates, feels good for a moment. But it costs you long-term peace. It keeps you tied to someone who doesn't deserve that much space in your heart. When you learn to choose long-term peace over short-term comfort, you break the cycle, you stop feeding the bond, and instead you start feeding your own growth. Cutting the emotional supply line isn't about punishing him, it's about liberating yourself. It's about saying, I deserve to wake up without being pulled back into his orbit. I deserve to focus on my life without the constant reminder of someone who isn't showing up for me. And once you make that choice, you'll realize the silence is where the healing finally begins. One of the most dangerous things we do after a breakup is tell ourselves a false version of the story. We replay the highlight reel. We think about the times he made us laugh, the moments we felt safe in his arms, the nights where it felt like nothing could go wrong. Our mind edits out the parts that hurt, and what we're left with is a fantasy, not the reality. That's why it becomes so difficult to let go, because we're not actually trying to walk away from who he really was. We're trying to walk away from the story we've built in our head. The story where he was perfect, the story where everything felt like a fairy tale, the story where maybe, just maybe, if you held on long enough, it could go back to the way it was in the beginning. But if you want to remove someone for good, you can't afford to keep telling yourself the highlight reel. You have to tell yourself the whole truth. That means remembering not just the moments of love, but the moments of neglect. Not just the times he showed up, but the countless times he didn't. Not just the times he said the right thing, but the many times he lied, ignored, or dismissed your feelings. It's not about demonizing him, it's about breaking the illusion. Because as long as you keep painting him in a light he never truly lived up to, you'll keep giving your heart reasons to stay stuck. There's a powerful shift that happens when you choose to redefine the story. Instead of thinking, "We had something so amazing, but it ended," you start thinking, "I was strong enough to walk away from something that looked amazing at times, but ultimately wasn't healthy for me." Instead of, "He made me feel so loved in the beginning," you start to recognize if the beginning was the best he could give, that wasn't love, it was a performance. The story changes from one of loss to one of empowerment, and that shift is everything when it comes to healing. Romanticizing the past is like putting a filter on a broken picture. It hides the cracks, but the cracks are still there. Redefining the story is like finally taking off the filter and seeing it clearly for what it is. You realize it wasn't the love story you built up in your head. It was a situation that taught you something. It taught you what you will no longer tolerate. It taught you what you truly deserve. And once you see it that way, it no longer feels like something precious you've lost. It feels like a lesson that made you stronger. This is why people who get stuck in relationships long after they've ended often say things like, "But we had such good times." Of course you did. Almost every relationship has moments of joy, but the standard for keeping someone in your life can't just be the occasional good time. It has to be consistency, respect, safety, growth. If those things weren't there, then the good moments weren't enough. When you redefine the story through that lens, you stop seeing him as the one who got away. You start seeing him as the one who didn't have what it takes to stay. The more honest you are about the full picture, the easier it becomes to emotionally detach. Because now, instead of longing for someone who doesn't exist, you're accepting the reality of who he actually was. And the reality isn't someone you want to run back to, it's someone you're relieved to finally be free from. That's when the longing fades, because longing can't survive in truth. Longing only survives in illusion. The moment you stop feeding the illusion, you to stop cessing the attachment. Redefining the story isn't easy because it requires giving up the fantasy. But the fantasy is what keeps you hurting. When you can look at the past with unfiltered eyes and tell yourself the truth, you no longer feel like you've lost something irreplaceable. You realize you've released something that was never meant to be permanent, and that shift is what makes letting go not just possible, but inevitable. When you remove someone from your life, it can feel like there's a giant hole left behind. The truth is, our brains and our hearts get used to the presence of a person. They become a habit, someone to text when something funny happens, someone to call when you're upset, someone who fills up quiet spaces with noise. So when they're gone, it's not just them you miss, it's the routine, the comfort, the sense of having someone there. That's why people often relapse and go back to someone who isn't good for them, because the empty space feels unbearable. But the space isn't the enemy, the space is the opportunity. What you put into that space determines whether you stay stuck or whether you grow stronger. Removing him isn't just about taking something away, it's about creating something new. That empty space is meant to be filled, but not with another quick fix or rebound. It's meant to be filled with you, with the parts of you that maybe got neglected while you were busy chasing his attention, with the passions you put on the shelf, the hobbies you stopped exploring, the friends you stopped calling because all your energy was wrapped up in him. Every time you redirect your focus from him to something that fuels you, you're not just moving on, you're rebuilding your identity. Think about it. When you were in the relationship, how much of your energy was consumed by worrying about him? By trying to read his moods, decode his texts, analyze his actions. Imagine all of that energy being redirected into something that makes you more magnetic, more confident, more alive. The things that once drained you now become fuel for growth. Suddenly, instead of obsessing over why he didn't call, you're channeling that energy into your fitness, your career, your creativity, your friendships. The space left behind stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like a canvas. The irony is, this is often the very thing that makes people look back and regret losing you. When you fill the space with you, you evolve into a version of yourself that isn't just surviving without him, you're thriving. You're glowing, you're moving forward in a way that makes your absence undeniable in his life. But the real beauty of it is, by the time he realizes it, you won't care. Because the space he left became the space you needed to rise. And this doesn't mean it won't feel painful at first. It will. There will be days where the silence feels loud, where the absence feels crushing, but that's why it's even more important to fill that silence with meaning. To structure your day with things that give you joy and purpose, to surround yourself with people who remind you of your value, to keep choosing activities that excite you, challenge you, and remind you of who you are outside of him. Healing isn't passive, it's active, and the way you fill the space is what determines how fast and how deeply you heal. It's also about giving yourself permission to take up that space. Sometimes, in relationships, you shrink yourself. You give up parts of who you are to fit what the other person wants. When he's gone, you might feel lost because you've been living smaller than your full self. But now is the time to expand again, to fill the room, fill your life, fill your own heart with everything that makes you feel alive. That's how you stop feeling like you're missing something. You stop missing him because you've replaced the emptiness with something far more valuable, yourself. In the end, removing him for good isn't just about cutting ties. It's about what you do next. If you only focus on the loss, you'll always feel empty. But if you see it as the chance to fill the space with your passions, your growth, your relationships, then the very thing that felt like a void becomes the foundation for your next level. You don't just move on, you rise. One of the most common traps people fall into after ending a relationship is leaving the door cracked open. It shows up in small ways, saving his number just in case, keeping the photos tucked away on your phone, telling yourself, "We'll see what happens in the future." It feels harmless, even comforting, because part of you doesn't want to face the finality. You don't want to admit it's truly over, so you create this secret backup plan in your mind where maybe one day, if the stars align, you'll find your way back to each other. But that little fantasy is exactly what keeps you stuck. As long as there's the idea of return, there will always be a part of you that hesitates to fully move forward. The truth is, the real power isn't in leaving options open, it's in closing them completely. When you burn the bridge in your mind, you free yourself from the cycle of waiting, hoping, and replaying. It's not about being cruel or unforgiving. It's about recognizing that you cannot heal if you're still secretly holding space for someone who already proved they don't deserve a place in your future. Saying maybe someday is just another way of postponing your happiness. Saying no return is what gives you the permission to build a life without constantly glancing back over your shoulder. Think about how exhausting it is to live with one foot in the past and one foot in the present. You're trying to move forward, but you keep pausing to look back. You start something new, but a part of your energy is still tied up in wondering, what if he comes back? That split focus robs you of joy. It keeps you distracted, drained, and emotionally unavailable to anything or anyone else. But the moment you cut off the possibility of return, everything changes. You reclaim all of that energy and channel it into yourself, into your goals, into the people who actually deserve your time. It's scary, I know, because finality feels brutal. We want safety nets. We want to know that if we change our mind, the door will still be open. But that safety net is really just a trap. It keeps you tethered to someone who isn't right for you. And the longer you leave the door open, the more time you waste. Years can pass while you tell yourself, maybe when he grows up, maybe when he realizes what he lost, maybe when the timing is better. But time doesn't owe you a reunion, and people rarely transform into the partner you dreamed of just because you waited. The only guarantee is that you'll lose pieces of your life waiting for someone who wasn't meant to stay. When you accept no return, you're making a declaration. My future is not dependent on someone who didn't choose me the first time. You're saying I am no longer waiting for a version of him that may never exist. I'm investing in myself, my peace, and my next chapter. That's where freedom lives. It's not in the half-hopeful limbo of maybe someday. It's in the finality of never again. That clarity feels sharp at first, but with time it becomes the most empowering decision you can make. Because here's the secret: once you truly accept no return, the longing fades faster. There's no more bargaining with yourself, no more mental gymnastics about what could happen. The story ends, the page turns, and for the first time, your heart actually gets to rest. That's when you create space for real love to come in, not recycled pain disguised as hope. Accepting no return isn't about bitterness. It's about giving yourself the gift of freedom. It's about finally cutting the chain to the past so you can run full speed into your future. Every time you think about going back to someone who hurt you, there's a question you have to ask yourself. Am I choosing a moment of comfort, or am I choosing a lifetime of dignity? Because in those moments of weakness, when you're tempted to answer the text, reopen the conversation, or step back into his arms, what you're really chasing isn't love, it's relief. It's the relief of not feeling lonely, of not sitting with the silence, of not confronting the reality that this person isn't good for you. But that relief is temporary. It lasts for a night, for a weekend, maybe for a few weeks, but it always ends the same way, with you feeling smaller, more disappointed, and more ashamed that you didn't hold the line. That's why choosing self-respect over sentiment is the key to removing him for good. Sentiment is powerful. It's built from memories, from all the times you laughed together, from the little routines you shared. Sentiment is what makes you scroll through old pictures, play your song, or replay the sweet things he used to say. It's the pull of nostalgia, and nostalgia has a way of blurring out all the pain. It makes you forget the nights you cried, the words he didn't mean, the moments you felt invisible. Self-respect, on the other hand, isn't emotional, it's logical. It's the voice inside you that says, I deserve better than this. I deserve consistency. I deserve to be chosen fully, not halfway. But when you're stuck in your feelings, that voice gets drowned out. That's why you have to deliberately put it front and center, reminding yourself that a fleeting moment of comfort will never outweigh a lifetime of dignity. Every time you break your own boundary, you chip away at your self-respect. You teach yourself that your needs, your standards, and your worth can be compromised for the sake of temporary affection. And over time, that's what truly damages you, not just the person, but the way you've betrayed yourself. On the other hand, every time you resist the urge to go back, every time you remind yourself of your value, you strengthen your self-respect. You build trust with yourself. You show yourself that you can be relied upon to make choices that honor your future instead of clinging to your past. That's the kind of self-respect that lasts a lifetime, and it's far more powerful than any sentimental memory could ever be. The truth is, dignity doesn't always feel good in the moment. It can feel lonely, it can feel cold, it can feel like you've cut yourself off from something that once made you feel alive. But dignity creates a foundation. It gives you a sense of certainty about who you are and what you deserve, and that certainty becomes the standard that shapes the rest of your life. It determines who you attract, how you're treated, and what you accept moving forward. Sentiment may warm you up for a night, but self-respect Beck builds the fire that keeps you strong for years to come. There will always be triggers, birthdays, anniversaries, a random song on the radio that bring back the pull of sentiment. And in those moments, you'll be tempted to forget the hurt and reach out. But if you can stop and ask yourself, what choice will make me proud tomorrow? What choice honors the person I want to become? You'll find the strength to resist. Because the truth is, you will never regret choosing dignity. You will never wake up wishing you had disrespected yourself more. But you will regret every time you gave in to sentiment at the expense of your self-worth. In the end, removing him for good isn't about forgetting the memories. It's about choosing to stop living by them. It's about valuing your self-respect more than the temporary comfort of going back. Because when you choose dignity over sentiment, you don't just close the chapter, you rise above it. You don't just walk away from him, you walk back into yourself. And that is the kind of strength that no one can take away. Removing him for good isn't about hate, it's not about revenge, and it's not about pretending the past never existed. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about refusing to wait for closure that will never come. It's about cutting off the emotional supply line that keeps you hooked. It's about telling the truth of the story instead of living in the fantasy. It's about filling the empty space with your own growth, accepting there is no return, and choosing self-respect over fleeting sentiment. When you do these things, you don't just erase him from your life, you rewrite your future. You stop being someone who waits to be chosen and start being someone who chooses themselves. And when you live from that place of power, the right people don't just notice you, they never want to let you go. So don't look back, don't reopen the door, don't wait for the words he'll never say. Walk forward with dignity, with clarity, and with the unshakable knowledge that the best chapters of your life have nothing to do with the man you left behind.